Hello people. Today we have this new aftermarket replacement safety kit we're going to install in this Remington 870 trigger group. However, keep in mind these new components and the process for which to install them is exactly the same whether you have an 1100, an 1187, an 1148, a Sportsman 12, a 760, a 780. Remington has manufactured several models over the decades that accept a very similar trigger housing that utilize the exact same safety components. Let's get started. First, of course, we want to make sure our firearm is unloaded. And to do that on an 870 or Sportsman 12, you just push up on this lever and then pull back on the foregrip. This will open up the chamber. If you're unaware of how to open the chamber on your Remington shotgun or rifle, find it in the user manual, look it up on YouTube, or put it in the comments below and I'll do a video about that model. First thing I want to point out about these trigger housings is this D spring right here. These cutouts in the pin are what hold the pin in the trigger housing and keep it in place to hold in the receiver. So when you're driving out these pins, of course, if you drive this pin out in this direction, because this D spring is on this side, you're pushing this pin out under the full tension of that spring under the full length of the pin. If you drive it out in this direction, from the left to the right, then it makes it a lot easier. And of course, this pin is going to be the exact same way, but opposite. If you drive it from this direction to the left, it's going to make it a lot easier for you to just pull it out. This D spring has to be on this side to retain this part, and this of course has to be on this side because the housing doesn't accommodate a D spring on that side. So you've got D springs on two different sides versus the front and the back pins. So just keep that in mind when you're driving it out. Drive out the pins. Drive out the rear from the left to the right and the front to the right to the left, and that'll be a lot easier for you. Another thing I want to point out is this hole. This is the access hole for the safety parts. This is where your safety parts are installed. If you'll notice, the hole is to the right of that line. This line represents the middle of your cast. This aluminum component, which is called the trigger plate, is a casted component, and that line signifies the center of the mold. That hole being on the right of that line tells us it's for a right-handed shooter. So it's on safe now, and if you deactivate it with your right-handed finger, now you're ready to shoot. And if you reactivate it with your right hand thumb, again, you're now on safety. You can't just turn this drum safety around and have it operate in reverse for a left-handed shooter. If you're a left-handed shooter and you want a left-handed trigger group, you need a trigger group where this hole is on the other side of this mold line. So that's how you tell the difference. Remington does make these. This is an aluminum trigger group. I don't believe you can buy aluminum trigger groups anymore from Remington, right or left-handed. I think they just do polymer, but they do exist in polymer and aluminum in right hand and left hand. So to drive out this pin, we just need to push on it with a punch. I suggest keeping a thumb or finger over that hole so you don't lose control of the spring. And you've got a detent in there as well. And then to get the safety out, you just push it all the way. Now it's going to be hanging up on the trigger. So if you pull forward on the trigger, it makes it a little easier to get it to come out. Now this is Remington's old original detent. It's got a little post on one end and rounded on the other, and you put the spring on like that, which kind of makes it a little convenient, but I mean this is really useless because you're just dropping the detent and the spring in a hole. They don't need to be together like this. This little post will break off sometimes. If it does break off, you really don't need it, but you got to make sure that you're putting the right end down toward the safety. But it's just so much easier to replace that style detent with a ball detent. Oh, almost lost it. And this is what Remington's using now, is just a regular ball bearing. All right. So here's our replacement safety, and it's an oversized, an aftermarket oversized. So of course with this, it can only go in from one direction, and we want it positioned like this for a right-handed shooter. And this is a right-handed trigger group. So we pull down on the trigger a little bit, and that'll give us a little bit more clearance. If you'll notice in the hole there that the metal component in the middle is the trigger. So when you're trying to drift it over, what it's getting hung up on a little bit is that metal part. So if you pull forward on a little bit, it just makes it a little easier. All right. Next thing we want to do is get the ball bearing in there. Now the spring. All right, now here's the hard part. And you got to be careful. This end of the pin is tapered or cut like a pyramid. You need to get this spring compressed so the pin goes over the top of the spring and not through the coils of the spring. Of course, if you go through the coils of the spring, you've damaged the spring. And now the safety is going to be loose, and it probably won't operate properly, and it might just fall right out. So if you use a traditional punch, it's really hard to get this pin between the end of the punch and the top of the spring, and you end up going through the coils of the spring again, and that's just very dangerous. This is a very common problem. So I created this punch that has a cutout going through the side. And what we do is compress the spring, and then that gives us the ability to push this pin into the tip of the punch, which is going over the spring and not through the spring. But we got to keep constant inward pressure on the pin as we wiggle the tool out. And once we get it out, we see there that we got it installed properly. It went over the spring and not through the spring. Now to test that, to make sure that it's installed properly, make sure it's on safe. Oh, that's fire. Make sure it's on safe. And you got nothing. Drift it back over, and you get a release of the hammer. So the safety should be positive and solid like that, and it should stay in place. That's the whole point of a quality spring. 870depot.com. Thanks for watching.